The stimulus packages presented by the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Mrs. Zainab Ahmed, yesterday include establishment of a 500 billion naira COVID-19 crisis intervention fund, enhanced financial support to the states for critical healthcare expenditure, augmentation to the states' FAC allocations, and moratorium on states' debts, and ensuring adequate supplies of essential food items and critical medical supplies, as well as appropriate stewardship of donated items and funds, an amendment of 2020 Appropriation Act. All right, let's get the perspective of a development strategist, Dr. Emeka Okengwu. He joins us from our Abuja studio. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Okengwu.
Pleasure. Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me.
So one of the stimulus packages announced by the federal government is the establishment of a 500 billion naira COVID-19 crisis intervention fund. How considerate is this amount?
It is very considerate. It's a good policy. But I rather we look at it from two very broad perspectives, from the policy perspective and then probably from the operational perspective, which is where probably you'll be looking at, where development comes into it. As a policy statement, it's very apt, it's very good. But when you now try to drill it down a little deeper, you might begin to see where the fault lines are and what we might be able to do as a country to make certain that we avoid those fault lines. Now, you saw that part of it is, yes, we're going to be taking some money we've, saved up or paid to IMF amounting to about $3.5 billion, dollars. Yes, we're going to be taking about $150 million, dollars from our Sovereign Wealth Investment Authority. All these are going to be, put into the things that you've listed on the television. But for me, operationally, I think it's important that we thin the lines between your exclusive and concurrent lists. That way, I think that part of what the federal government should also be seeking from the National Assembly is some kind of legislation that now allows the president to be able to run this thing as a single unit. What do I mean by this? So that we have a single program for everybody in the country that will now be able to deal with what you need to deal with when you're going ahead with a scourge. One will be containment, and in this containment perspective, this is where you're going to be having, your equipment, your testing, your technology. Now, to what extent are we able to apply some of this funding to making certain that we now indigenize these technologies? Two will be isolation. And in isolation, of course, you're now talking about treatment. And then again, to what extent are we also applying some of these funds to making certain that the treatment protocols are also indigenous? Then three will be the social, aspect of it, or what you might be able to call, social infrastructure. Now, to what extent, again, is this going to be creating the social infrastructure? And then under social infrastructure is where you have isolation, which is key. But in also doing isolation and social distances, we're not going to stay home forever. To what extent are we also able to make certain that in doing social distancing, our economy does not collapse? So these are where I think we might need to think this thing a little bit deeper. And for it to get right, instead of, for me, again, and this is talking as a development person, I think that at the core of all this, to be able to get it right, will be for us to be able to approach this thing from a purely, science, technology, and innovation perspective. Now, that way, we're able to now begin to look at research, and research outputs being at the heart of what it is we want to do. And then saying that again, now including what you call your subnationals, we'll be making certain that instead of now losing jobs, we can actually use this, Chimeze, as it were, to be able to create jobs. And I think it's very possible. And from my own experiences and what it is I'm doing, I think that if we're able to get this right, trust me, in about the next 6 or 7 months, we should be able to be creating close to 14 to 15 million jobs if we put, research supported by technology, and innovation into focusing on this.
Now, Dr. Okengwu, now part of the fund actually is for the establishment of a special public works program, and that is expected to result in the employment of about 774,000 Nigerians. I mean, isn't that what you're talking about? So isn't it still in line with what you're talking about?
No, that is not in line with what I'm talking about. The public works program is already going on. It's ongoing. But what government wants to do is actually expand it. Okay, it's ongoing under a program they call Youth Entrepreneurship Social Support Operations, YESO. Okay, it's being funded by the World Bank and then run, under the Ministry of Finance. What they want to do is to be able to engage people to be able to do public works, clean gutters, make things. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Nigerians being part of the contributing into revenue. Because you see, when we do this expenditure and finish spending, and we are not getting any revenues, and remember, look at the two biggest countries that everybody looks up to. China is already at over 300%, debt to GDP. United States is about 210% or thereabout. And these people are losing jobs. Yes, China is bouncing back, but they're bouncing back. They're going to be, trying to, as much as they can, to increase their revenues. And that will mean pushing exports. What I'm talking about is, to what extent is this going to make certain that our productive capacities are kickstarted? And then probably these 1,000 persons per local government, instead of just, doing public works and cleaning gutters, are now engaged in probably forage production, if you may, are now engaged in even planting and production of medicinal plants that will, support the phyto sector of medicine production and pharmaceuticals, be able to now support food production. And then remember that there are two levels to this. You must be able to know that the first level is what you call your inputs level, that can now begin to now, support your midstream industries, that can now begin to now, support maybe what you call, your upper scale industries, that can now begin to push into, first and foremost, the African market. Now, this way, if we do it this way, you are now looking at an investment, not expenditure. That's the point I'm trying to make. If we're not very careful and we now make this an expenditure, returning on that expenditure or getting returns from that expenditure might be tough. But if we make it an investment and then we clog it around the things that can be able to create, clear returns, then we'll have a country that will be standing probably in the next, and before you know it, we can actually now increase our GDPs by getting everybody to contribute their own little bits. So the question will be, where will be the key? What will be the drivers? What roles will people play? And that's why I'm saying that you're not going to be supporting states to be able to do their programs, because this will require, again, maybe the development of, common shared infrastructure. You're not going to be talking about borders. You will now be talking about boundaries. So that way, you'll be talking about belts. You'll be talking about food belts, you'll be talking about forage belts, you'll be talking about production belts, you'll be talking about value processing belts, from cottage industries to the meat sectors to what. So it must be all about production, so that by the end of the day we're able to return the 3.5 billion probably that we're technically borrowing from IMF. Because when you take that money, you're not going to get it again. It's actually our money, yes, but you must be able to return it. We're able to return the 150 million dollars we have taken out of the sovereign investment fund, which is supposed to be for times like this. But if we spend that money and we spend it on things that do not have clear returns, on investments, we might be running into a risk of running into better storms, because we don't even know how long, this might ultimately last. But for me, I don't see it ending in the next 5 to 10 years.
Now, that brings us to the issue of implementation, because I believe that if this is properly implemented, perhaps we would achieve some of the things you have mentioned here. Now, if you were to advise the federal government, what would be your first point of call? How best do you think that these monies can be channeled appropriately, to really achieve the desired goal?
For me, my first advice would be for the government to seek, more authority for us to be able to blur the lines between the things that happen in the exclusive list and the things that happen in the concurrent list. That thereby now getting just one big, holistic plan for everybody in the country. And then we'll now start talking about, what you call volumes. Okay, we'll now start streamlining what we need to be able to be nutritionally secure. What volume of rice, do we need? What amount of land do we need? What volume of cowpea? What volume of poultry products? What volume of phyto or medicinal plants do we need? Now, how do we now get this land? How many people will be involved into doing this? It becomes a Nigerian program. But the moment you begin to give this stimulus to the states, I'm not trying to say it is wrong to support the states, but you see what happened, when there were some bailout funds to them. Very few of them utilized it really well. Most of them haven't been able to refund it. But we can't even afford, to play with the things that are happening now with our major source of income, which is oil. It's fluctuating. Yes, good news. I think it rose to about $33 or something. But I think the Brent crude is still oscillating between $26 or thereabout. So the most and the greatest thing we should be able to do now is not to look at this as a public sector thing. It has to be a Nigerian program. The research institute has to come in here. Our universities have to come in here. Our private sector people have to come in here. There just has to be, some synergy that brings us together. And again, remember that for me, it's a global pandemic, but it hasn't become a pandemic in Nigeria because so far we have, I think, about 16 or 17 states, and and these 17 states, only 2 or 3 locations with, higher than 20 figures, if you may. Now, it simply means that the ones that are not already affected, how are we able to now get them to support those who are through production of essentials? Okay, now what programs do we have to be able to make certain that our land, the 81 million hectares of land that we say is arable, is not allocated to a state but allocated, to what you call Nigeria as a corporate entity. Now, the 200 million people, 65 million, which now will form our human capital, is not allocated to states but allocated to the country called Nigeria. How do we now begin to distribute these things? What technologies are available? What research institutes can we be able to support? I'm involved in 1 or 2 things that are happening now, even before the coronavirus, and you will be shocked, Chimezie. I'm amazed, okay? Amazed at the level, at the depth of research outputs. There's an agency called the Agricultural Research Council of Nigeria. They have 2 volumes, okay, of research outputs coming from all research institutes across the country. There's another agency called NIPRID. They have done so much in phytomedicine. They have even produced some of these medicines that can be able to boost immunity. Ditto for so many other ones. There's another agency called the National Medicinal Plants Development Agency. They have established, medicinal plant nurseries all over Nigeria. All we need to do now is to be able to now align these resources and then create a national volume, a national, plan that begins to now tie this to one single goal. And what would that be? Make certain that we create more jobs, make certain that we now begin to ramp up on these technologies and research outputs, to be used, in innovative programs.
Now, in this whole thing, as a result of this COVID-19 thing, we have seen the federal government shut down some of the states, Lagos, Ogun, Abuja. Now, the federal government, of course, recognizes the impact of the 14 days lockdown and is going ahead to ensure adequate supplies of essential food items and critical medical supplies. Already, we have seen states distribute food items to people. First, how would you estimate the cost of this lockdown, and will these palliatives assuage it?
Well, you see, there are 2 things. There are 2 ways you look at it, Chimezie. You might look at it from the food component, but there is more to it. What about sanitation? What about sanitary pads? Okay, what about handling waste? Okay, what about the kerosene you need to cook those foods? For those of us who were born in the days of the war, there used to be something after the war that the government introduced. For those of us who are Igbos, we call it Gari Gabon or Formula 2. It was some corn meal that was fortified, I think, with egg yolks or something. Now, for me, the food distribution, if what we see on the social media and even on television is anything to go by, I don't think it's been very successful, because it is not about reaching the poor people. And again, remember that government says we are working with the information we have on the SR, the single register of very poor and vulnerable people. And it's not even all the states that are on that register. I know because I'm involved in that program. But right now, we're not just talking about poor people, we're talking about hungry people, and those are 2 different things. So I think that for us going forward, this is where I keep saying that technology must be able to play a role. Proper planning must be able to play a role. I think that we must be able to now start thinking about installing incinerators, because by the time you finish, sharing that food and the person doesn't have kerosene to be able to cook it, is he going to eat it raw? Okay, by the time he is able to cook it and then he's not able to manage the waste or whatever, has he been able to live well? And you're talking about people who, and what this has actually exposed is that the reality of our country is that we have a lot of our citizens living under the breadline. Not even those that you classify as poor now, even those that are working. Okay, so it's all about being able to also change our distribution model. For me, giving that raw food might be good, but I think it might be better if we looked at that Formula 2 that we used after the war. Cereals, okay, fortified biscuits, light foods that you do not need, a lot of energy to be able to cook or something on one part. Then you must also look at your social distancing. Let me tell you how you can get communities involved in this. If I were government, what I would suggest government to do is to probably go to these localities and just set up tents, what you might be able to call blood, sample collection, tents. The moment you collect 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 people's blood samples, people begin to be part of this. Okay, because right now, but I also understand the NCDC, we must praise them. They have done wonderfully well. It's all kudos for them and the ministry, and of course the people in Lagos State. However, having said that, okay, we must know that the minister also said that this thing can get communal. So what efforts are we doing now? It is just not to get on radio or on television to be able to say, oh, keep home and keep safe. I think people need to be involved in this, more involved in this. So in answering the question of the food distribution, okay, 33,000 metric tons of corn. How are they going to turn it into cereal? Where are the engines are not allowed to go out? Okay, how are they going to be able to now convert it into proper foods? But if you had gotten Firo to probably take those 33,000 metric tons of grains, they would have been able to turn it into some cereal that can be able to now help everybody. At least put water, warm it up a little anyhow you can, and be able to. So I think we need to rethink and think these things through, really.
Dr. Okengwu, it looks like you're one of those who are not in support of this lockdown. But don't forget that this is first a health crisis resulting to an economic crisis. Is the lockdown too much a price to pay to tackle this pandemic?
No, I'm not against the lockdown. Okay, but I'm against the lock-in. Okay, now what's the difference between a lockdown and a lock-in?
I need
to
understand.
A lockdown is stay safe. A lock-in is cluster. Okay, and with hopelessness. So what do we have now? We have a lock-in. And because we have a lock-in, people are breaking out. But if we had a lockdown where everybody was happy at home, okay, could be able to, like I said to you, sip one or two things. But if people, eventually we're going to be moving Chimezie. We have a country of over 200 million people. Okay, we've tested less than 4,000. And for you to be able to contain this virus, the most important component of containing it is testing. And for us to be able to do any proper mapping, you must be testing close to 10 million people, at least 20 million, which would be 20% of the population. We don't even have those kits to do that. Now, lockdown is fine. Okay, but like people say to you, I'm locking down, I'm drinking water, it's no longer working for me. Okay, but we must also be able to find that strategy where, like a lot of countries have said, wearing a mask helps. Okay, when I got picked up, by your staff this morning, the first thing the man did was to bring out a sanitizer, and I brought out my mask. And both of us were mumbling greetings to each other. Okay, so we must begin to now inculcate this habit of make certain that you are not releasing spittle or spottle from your mouth by wearing mask. Now that brings another challenge. It's also the production of masks indigenized. Is it captured in these, bailout funds? Abia State had made a move. I mean, you have a lot of tailors in Kano, okay, who can be able to also produce these masks. Are we also able to know that the production of masks and distribution of masks is as important as the distribution of these food items? Are we also conscious that the production and distribution of water, safe water, is also as important as distribution of rice and gari and bread? So these are the things I'm saying that in trying to get, are we going to get out of this? Certainly we are. Has government done very well? And more kudos for them. My hands are up. Okay? But can we also now think it a little bit deeper and make it a little bit more innovative? That's actually what my argument is.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Okengwu. Well, I'm sure we'll get it right eventually. Thank you for your time.